Life exists because of energy. If we want to understand patterns of diversity, we need to know how organisms process energy. Organisms need energy to grow, move, maintain their body temperature, reproduce, and synthesize chemicals. This synthesis of chemicals is called metabolism. Animals and other heterotrophs get their energy through cellular respiration, which takes place in mitochondria. The process requires the input of food and oxygen and produces the chemical ATP. Heterotrophs can be classified as consumers if they eat living things or recently dead things in the case of scavengers like vultures, detritivores if they break down the bodies of dead things, and saprotrophs if they break down the bodies of dead things into smaller parts. Saprotrophs are also called decomposers and are almost all bacteria and fungi. This is not the only way to obtain energy though. Photoautotrophs like plants and cyanobacteria use photosynthesis to get energy, while some bacteria derive their energy from organic chemicals in a process known as chemosynthesis. If we examine energy flow through a food chain, we notice that the amount of energy being transferred decreases because 90% is lost as heat. In the same way that the light bulb produces heat, your body struggles to efficiently convert sugars without losing heat.
Energy-saving bulbs use 1/5 of the energy of ordinary bulbs.
This is one reason why ecosystems have many autotrophs, but few top predators. This energy pyramid is a model describing these trends. The 10% rule states that only 10% of energy eaten is converted into biomass or dry weight. Since plants support larger populations, this might make you wonder why carnivores exist. Well, plants don't want to be eaten, and so they defend themselves. The nutrient levels in plants are low compared to animals. The chemical composition of animals is more similar, and herbivore populations are limited by competition and abiotic factors. Let's review.
When we were little, we loved nature shows. One reason was because we didn't have cable, and it was one of the few things we actually got a TV signal for that didn't require you to dance around with a TV antenna for reception. But the other reason was that, of course, it was cool science. It often showed animals that we couldn't see in our own backyard doing some awesome things. But then it would be a little traumatizing when, inevitably, some predator would walk in and gobble the unsuspecting animal up. Truly, action scenes with predators and prey are often shown in nature shows because it's all part of nature's food chains. A food chain starts with a producer. A producer is an organism that is an autotroph, which means that it makes its own food. A plant, for example. The plant is eaten by a primary consumer, this grasshopper here. Consumers are heterotrophs, which means that they need to feed on other organisms. The primary consumer is eaten by a secondary consumer, this frog. The secondary consumer is eaten by a tertiary consumer, this snake, and the food chain can keep going. Notice how the arrows are supposed to point in the direction of the one doing the eating, which makes sense because that's the direction of the energy flow. You can also arrange this same food chain into an energy pyramid. The producers are at the base here. In trophic level 1, they actually contain the most energy. What is crazy to think about is the primary consumers here, in trophic level 2, they actually only store 10% of the energy from the producers. Meaning, let's say the plants here had 10,000 kilocalories. That's an energy unit of energy. Well, the next level here, the primary consumers in trophic level 2, they would only store 1,000 kilocalories of energy. So where did the rest of the energy go? Much of it is lost in heat or undigested. If you go up to the secondary consumers in trophic level 3, that would be only 100 kilocalories of energy. So as you go up each trophic level, it's roughly only 10% of the energy from the trophic level below that will be stored. Back to our food chain. Notice that, like a domino effect, if something is removed, let's say the grasshoppers, you can harm the others because they might not have enough to eat. You really have to consider the relationships among organisms in a food chain. In fact, even if you took out the apex predator in this particular food chain, which is the snake, you could end up with an excessive population of frogs, and so many frogs that it's possible they wouldn't have enough grasshoppers to even support them. You know, this is actually not a very good model because in real life, this snake probably doesn't just eat frogs. It probably eats rabbits and birds too, because an ecosystem doesn't typically have a single food chain. Instead, it has more of a food web. A food web is made up of multiple food chains that interact together. So notice how now we have multiple food chains here tied in with our original to make a food web. The beauty of a food web is that it shows more interactions among a variety of producers and various level consumers. It also can show biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of organisms, all types of organisms, living in a given area. The size of the area that we're talking about, as well as the climate of the area, directly affect the biodiversity that is present. Biodiversity can contribute to the sustainability of an ecosystem. What I mean by that is, let's say there was a decrease in the amount of small birds in this food web. Well, it's likely that will be harmful to other organisms. However, it is not the only thing that the snakes feed on. They have other options because of the biodiversity. The snakes also eat rabbits and they eat frogs. So because of this biodiversity, the ecosystem might be more resilient to changes such as these and possibly recover. However, these changes can still have detrimental effects, and it's why it's critical to protect ecosystem biodiversity. High biodiversity has a lot of other benefits. They can include economics, and we'll need another video to really touch on all the benefits of high biodiversity. So if we were to ask you which of our examples here had more biodiversity, our food chain here or our food web, you would definitely want to pick the food web. One last thing, there are some organisms that we left out of our food webs and food chains, but they're kind of a big deal. Decomposers. Decomposers are heterotrophs since they do eat other things, even if the things they're eating are dead. Decomposers include organisms like bacteria and fungus. Technically, if we were to draw them in, then every arrow here would eventually point to them.
Metabolic rate is measured as the speed at which food is broken down into usable energy. Someone with a slow metabolism eats a little, but still gains weight. Smaller animals have lower metabolic rates because they need less energy to maintain themselves. But if we look at the relationship between metabolic rate per kilo of body mass and body size, we see a different trend. Small animals actually have very high metabolisms for their size. And this is probably because they lose more heat since they have a larger surface area to volume ratio. Scientists don't fully understand why this relationship works this way, but the pattern is clear. This graph includes not just mammals, but birds and reptiles. Notice how birds tend to be above the line and reptiles tend to be below the line. Birds have higher metabolisms than mammals because they need a ton of energy to fly. Like mammals, they are endothermic, which means they use the heat lost when converting sugars to heat their body. Thus, a mouse stays warm when put in a refrigerator. We sometimes call endotherms warm-blooded and ectotherms cold-blooded, but scientists don't like these terms because the blood temperature of reptiles isn't actually cold. Ectotherms need to warm themselves using the sun and are sluggish when it's cold outside. So endotherms, like mammals, can live in cold climates, but they have to eat a lot more and often. Ectotherms, like reptiles and amphibians, can go a long time without eating, but are restricted to warm climates. Dinosaurs and sharks are considered in between, mesotherms. Animals may also maintain their body temperature behaviorally by basking in the sun, cooling themselves in water or shade, or clustering together for warmth. Now that we have established how organisms obtain energy, let's look at global patterns of energy availability. Ultimately, life exists because of photosynthesis. The measure of the rates of photosynthesis is called productivity. Gross primary production is the total energy produced by photosynthesis, and net primary production is the value minus the energy lost as heat or through respiration. Here is a map of net primary production across the globe. I want you to notice two things. First, productivity is highest in tropical rainforests like the Amazon. Second, recall that biodiversity is also highest along the equator. Speciation occurs in parts of the world where energy production is highest, which is where the sun shines the most. Now remember that paper we read about the Amazon no longer being a carbon sink? If the Amazon is a carbon source, what does that mean about net primary productivity? It's not just energy that is being cycled within the planet. Other chemicals like carbon, nitrogen, and water are cycled too. These are called biogeochemical cycles. The speed of these cycles depends on decomposition. Humans have disrupted these cycles by using these chemicals or converting them into different forms. In the next lecture, we will examine the impact of humans on ecosystems.